Hi guys, my name's Andrea. I wanted to talk about the short story, The Embodiment by Bora Chung. She wrote this in Japan where it is forbidden to talk about menstruation. So I thought that was really interesting. And I particularly enjoyed it because I am a mother, for one, and I am a respiratory therapist who works in a neonatal ICU. So I get to work with a lot of women who are pregnant, postpartum. Many of the NICU babies go home and live normal, healthy lives. Some never go home, and there is infant loss. And some go home with lasting disabilities, especially if they're um, especially preterm. So there are some concepts here that I think relate to either something I've experienced or some women who I work with and what they've experienced. And it's really interesting. So I was going to do this while I make some banana bread. I know that this isn't what we talked about when we were learning about domestic horror, but I thought that this might go well and we can look at something else while we talk about this. Okay, so I'm just gonna go ahead and mix together some ingredients here. All right. So in the embodiment, it begins with this young woman who's having this prolonged menstruation. And we talked about how that maybe defied the convention of not discussing menstruation, which I think is something that we kind of do here in our culture as well. It's not really acceptable to talk about it unless you're talking amongst other women, and it can even be uncomfortable to talk about it with a gynecologist, depending on your circumstance. Um, and that's something that this woman in the embodiment actually does. She feels that it's uncomfortable to talk to a gynecologist, so when she's having this prolonged menstruation, she doesn't want to see a gynecologist about it. Um, so she waits until she's beyond 13 days into her period and she's experiencing dizziness, so there's pretty much no other option. So this is an excerpt. It was almost 2 weeks without any sign of the bleeding stopping. The flow seemed to taper off at night, but would inevitably return by dawn. A fortnight later, almost 2 weeks without any sign of stopping. The flow seemed to taper off at night, but would inevitably return by dawn. Okay, so should she see a gynecologist? But the office was not a place a young unmarried woman could visit without feeling oddly guilty. When she was dizzy, she had to go. She wiped off the gel. So this is once she's being examined by the gynecologist. And he kind of coldly places some ultrasound gel, doesn't really discuss what he's going to be doing with her, and just proceeds. She was trying to wipe off the gel as best she could. It kept getting all over her hands and her clothes, no matter how vigorously she mopped, and went back to the consultation room. The doctor glanced at the chart him before him and asked, "Have you been stressed lately or had any big changes in your environment?" She confessed, "I'm writing my thesis, but don't think that I'm stressed about it." The doctor gave her a look before scribbling something down. "Stress causes hormonal imbalances that can lead to your situation. According to the ultrasound, you're fine. So I'll prescribe you some birth control pills. Take them for 3 weeks, go off of them, and take them for 3 weeks more, then rest for a week, and so on. You'll be back to normal in 2 months." So this really seems like a lot of women can probably relate to this. Just kind of in the healthcare field, not necessarily expecting or caring whether you understand. Patients are often told to do this and are expected to just do it because their doctor said. I think this is part of like an outgoing culture that's not as popular anymore. Here, I'm going to pause while we mix here. Okay, guys, so I didn't realize that one of my eggs fell on the floor, so I resumed this with my eggs both together here. And as I was saying, the outgoing culture in medicine is that the men are the doctors and the women are the nurses. So as of the last 40, 50 years, many other practices have come about, like respiratory, for instance, which formerly belonged to part nursing, and part of it was the doctors who would manage the ventilators and such. So, under the outgoing culture, it was like the doctors would say what it was, the nurses would blindly listen, the doctor would say what it was, the patients would blindly listen. Now, as of lately, we've developed many other disciplines within the healthcare field, and as more people began to give their input to doctors, as was required to have a good multidisciplinary team, doctors became more receptive, and healthcare started to become more like a consumer oriented business where it wasn't just whatever the doctor said. It would be a collaboration between the patients and the doctors. But even now, every once in a while, you'll still find a doctor who is like, this is what I want. I don't need to hear any, like, essentially like back talk from the patient. Don't really want to consult the multidisciplinary team, because like they have the most education. They feel that their word is kind of like the default. So that seems like this is somewhat of what this character is experiencing. So it's just kind of like the doctor said to do this, and this is how you're supposed to be taking this medication. However, it didn't work out for her. She continued to be bleeding once she stopped the medication. So she had to regroup and decide what she was going to do. Because going back to the doctor was so embarrassing, she decided to try to manage it on her own. Um, and you saw how uncomfortable the doctor made her feel. He asked if she was stressed, but when she didn't respond in the affirmative, he essentially said, this is from stress. This is why your hormones are imbalanced. This is why the birth control is going to be what helps you fix this. So really wasn't listening to her. Whenever she continued to have her menstruations, once she stopped the birth control after 2 months, she kept trying to go back on the pill long enough to stop it, but then to discontinue it whenever she could. Partially because she wanted to listen to the doctor, but also partially because she was footing the expense of this birth control pill, which she ended up having to do for 6 months. So once she started feeling unwell again, she realized that she was going to have to go back to the hospital. So she went back to the big hospital. She got x-rays taken and her blood pressure and urine were examined. This doctor informed her of her results in an emotionless manner. You're pregnant. Excuse me? She should You should see an obstetrician. Let me see. She went down a few floors to see one of the hospital obstetricians, a young woman in her 30s who wore an unbelievable amount of makeup. After a few more fairly unpleasant examinations, the obstetrician declared her diagnosis in an ice cold voice. You're 6 weeks pregnant. But I'm unmarried and have no boyfriend, she explained. You've never had any sexual experiences or taken any pills? I did take some birth control pills for a while because my period wouldn't stop. For how long? 6 months. The doctor gave her a sharp look, narrowing her bright blue eyeshadow, thickly penciled on eyes. They were prescribed. Or rather, were they prescribed? The doctor told me to take them for a couple months, and you don't really need a prescription for birth control pills. Her voice trailed off as she felt oddly ashamed. If the doctor told you to take them for 2 to 3 months, you should have taken them for just that. Well, my period just wouldn't stop. The doctor sighed, her irritation out of her vividly painted red lips. Your body happens to be abnormal. A side effect from taking birth control pills for a long time can be pregnancy. Really? But aren't birth control pills supposed to prevent pregnancy? Her objection came out meek. The doctor's black and blue gaze immediately turned sharp again. You're the one who overdid it with the pills. It's your fault. Medication isn't candy. You can gorge on whenever you feel like it. What? What do I do now? The doctor flipped through her chart. Does the child have a father? Excuse me? Does the child have someone who can be their father? No. The doctor looked up and again gave her a scary look through thick mascara. Then you better hurry up and find a man who is willing to be this baby's father. Okay, so I thought that this was very much like kind of real life. We have all the stereotypes of like the women who were on the Maury show, and at least that's what was prevalent like in the 90s. I don't know if I'm showing my age. And a lot of women feel just societal pressure to have like the traditional family, the nuclear family, where there's like a mom, a dad, the kids, and basically that they have to like either like get married to whoever their partner is, you know, despite what that may look like for the woman's own mental health, or whether that would be healthy for the child, even more so just for the image, preserving your image. Um, and then that can obviously cause additional stress on the women, or not necessarily be the best situation. You might not be in the right situation to have a child. Also, I know a lot of women who might not have health insurance um, may try to apply for welfare insurance. And I know from firsthand experience that when you apply for welfare insurance, they make you take a pregnancy test, but you can't take one at home. They make you go to a facility. And at least in the town where I came from, when I was pregnant with my son, I went to this place that was essentially trying to convince you not to have an abortion. And for me, that really wasn't a consideration at that time. And obviously, I don't regret it now. I love my son. But they basically asked me, what do you plan on doing about this whenever it came back positive? And I was like, I guess I'm going to have a baby. And they're like, okay, you're not like thinking about like having an abortion. And I'm like, no. They're like, okay, because we have a lot of adoption options for you. We can get you in touch with an adoption counselor and this and that. And it really wasn't presented like abortion was on the table. So I feel like this character in the short story is also not presented with the option. It's like, now you have to like find a father, you know? And I think that's really interesting. I think it's very much like real life, unfortunately. Okay, so this becomes a theme for the rest of the short story, just finding a father for this baby. And it's explained to her that it's imperative for the baby's growth and for the maternal health. She was then sick for work, and her thesis advisor was pretty hard on her. All of this, mind you, is out of her realm of control. She was just like trying to do what her doctor said. She was trying to control this bleeding because otherwise she knew that she'd be unwell. Her opinion was kind of dismissed, like we talked about, and she's just trying to navigate this situation. However, more disappointment for her thesis advisor and for her job that she is still going through this. It's really inconvenient for the people around her. So queasiness and discomfort were like the hallmarks of her first see-on date. So that's kind of the way that someone in the Asian culture may try to arrange having like an arranged marriage. So that is her avenue to try to find a father for this baby. So she essentially went on this date with this guy who was understanding of her being pregnant, and he asked if he could have some more time to decide if he'd like to be the father of this baby, given that he doesn't know her and things like that. But other see-on dates weren't as understanding. Some left when she went to the restroom. Others just flat out expressed their distaste for her arranging this date without being forward about her being pregnant before they came out. The pregnancy became obvious at 5 months. Her morning sickness seemed to get worse. for a time period, but eventually it kind of began to taper off. Her breasts grew bigger. Her weight climbed to the point where her feet and her back hurt. She became out of breath easily, with her ankles frequently swelling up. She often felt a knot in her chest, sweating like a fiend, and was constantly in and out of the bathroom. The hospital kept assuring her that these were all normal signs of pregnancy, but at 6 months there was no longer any fetal movement. She only felt a slight twisting or trembling inside of her. All of these were the sensation of a baby kicking inside of her womb. Okay, so I'm going to run my mixer again. So I'm just going to pause us here. Get back. Okay, so she returns to her obstetrician, considering the baby's no longer kicking. So we continue with our quote. The thickly made up obstetrician sneered at her worries. You still haven't found a father for the child? This is all because of that. Well, I mean, it's not so easy, she responded. Nothing in life is easy. Did you really think pregnancy would be easy? What are you trying to do about it? Do you have any idea how little time is left? I'm looking, but if this is your attitude now, what kind of mother do you think you're going to be? Think about it. There is a life growing inside your belly right at this minute. A human being is being created. You have to take responsibility for an entire human being. But if you're this nonchalant about the fetus, what are you going to do after you give birth? But so we see that she's like already experiencing this mom guilt as we continue on. She can't really find a father for the baby because she's pregnant. She's like in this awkward situation. And we're seeing like some real differences here in real life, right? So she really wouldn't be pregnant if she didn't have sex. And I wondered if in the culture, in the Japanese culture, if it's more shameful that this came about from a period rather than through sex that wasn't marital. So I don't know, but I think it's really interesting. And she's just like kind of in a hopeless situation. Despite her family deciding that they're going to post an ad in the paper, she was harassed with calls. Some were serious, some weren't. One caller was a 33-year-old conglomerate worker, sounded good, and then their date was arranged. However, when she showed up, she found that he was actually arranging a date on his father's behalf, or rather his father-in-law's behalf. And he had a lot of money. He was promising that he could help take care of the child. But whenever they met at this restaurant, there ended up being a brawl between someone who wasn't serious and had formerly called her and was like, hey, if you give me this money, then I won't tell people that I'm actually the dad of your baby and that this child's like a bastard, essentially. So, pretty interesting. And the rich man's entourage ended up going up against the this man who said that I'm going to broadcast that like your baby's a bastard, and basically she was able to slide out of the restaurant as they were arguing with each other. So once she escaped, there was she retreated to a bus. There was a woman on that bus who basically gave her this unsolicited advice. She made assumptions that she was pregnant and the father ran out on her. What prompted this is that she was actually able to recognize her as being the woman from the paper. So her family, like as well-meaning as they were to try to help find a father, they ended up making matters worse. So she did, however, end up like taking like comfort in this woman's words, despite them being unwarranted. So let's see. I have a quote here I thought was pretty nice from that. The woman eventually said, I mean, that's life. The older woman went on to say, and life goes on. Think of the child in your belly. Live only for the child. It's not easy raising a kid alone these days, but you've got to be strong and keep living your life. Children grow up so fast. Mark my words. Today will seem like a distant memory soon enough. Okay, good time for a break. Okay, so basically she gets this advice from this older woman to just forget about herself, to live for the baby. And the reason that I think she's like actually comforted by this is because it's giving her a distraction. So she has all these competing things in her life, like she's trying to finish her thesis, she's have to take a leave from work, she's getting essentially shamed by society, by these Sion dates. She's not pleasing her family by having not found a father. As much as they're trying to help her, it's just like there's pressure from all directions. So her getting this advice from this woman to live for her child, I think might actually be like what her conscience is telling her to do, especially like coming up in that society, if those were their values. Whether or not she may disagree with it or realize how impossible it is to meet the expectations, that may be the same moral standard that she's feeling inclined to like holding herself to. So essentially, she goes on at home, and she's thinking about this and just kind of like having a moment of reflection. Like, she's thinking about the Sion dates and like how ridiculous some of those were, and the calls she got from her family putting the ad in the paper, um, you know. And suddenly she's like overtaken with this feeling that she's like really hungry. So for the first, this is an excerpt. For the first time in what felt like forever, she felt ravenous. She wanted to eat something delicious for the baby. She jumped up from her seat. When she opened her eyes again, she was lying on the floor. Why am I here? She managed to sit up. It took some time for her to gather her wits about her. The anemia. I must have fainted when I got up. She felt around the back of her head. There was a large bump, and it began to scare her. She felt a warmth between her legs. So we see that she was thinking about the baby. She was trying to do the right thing. And essentially, she wanted something to eat, and then it specifies for the baby. That's her intention. She's decided that she's going to do what's best for the baby. And despite this, she still can't do the right thing. She ends up falling and hitting her head. So that clearly is not what's best for the baby, because she's just a total failure. She was just dead wrong from the time she became pregnant and prior for taking her birth control wrong. The fetus was finally moving whenever she was on the way to the hospital again, being that she called them because she's in this fluid and she's bleeding a lot. The driver happened to be her first Sion date. So she was begging the paramedic to be the baby's father, and then she decided to beg the Sion's date to be her initial Sion date to be the baby's father, all on the way to the hospital. And she's kind of like in this desperate situation. And they stabilize her. They're able to get her to the floor. She has this like pounding headache. And whenever she arrived, she found some short-lived relief when the baby was born, because she was like having this urge to have the baby and push, and this pounding headache that wasn't able to be resolved. The baby turned out to be this squirmy blood clot. And it was like disturbingly like kind of like looking for its mother. While she's holding the baby up in the air, she's like asking the staff, like, what is this? Like, what happened? And they're essentially like, this is your fault. Like, this is what your baby is because you couldn't listen to the advice. She said, this is a baby? And then it's the same woman who had the heavy makeup on that she described earlier. I told you to find the baby a father. You were the one who left it grow without one. This is what you end up with. The doctor's voice was cold, and her eyes seemed to say, "This is all your fault." The blood clot squirmed, and she flinched. So it specifies, and I think this is kind of interesting, that she holds it up in the air, and it starts to look like crystalline. And as she's like looking at it and like trying to find its eyes, it disintegrates just into liquid blood, and her arms are left there, like up in the air, in the position that she was in when she held the baby. So I thought this was interesting, and the fact that her arms were like kind of staying there, I wondered is like maybe a contrast of like how some women may have this certain expectation that isn't fulfilled, or it ends up being different from how someone maybe explained to them that the childbirth process would be. Because it's like whenever you're pregnant, people tell you to like come up with a birth plan. So essentially you're planning what you're going to do. So a lot of women say, I'm not going to be on any medication. I am going to deliver naturally, to where their expectations aren't fulfilled. They end up having to be on a lot of medication. They end up needing an epidural to be able to progress through their labor. Otherwise, they may end up needing a cesarean. And all of this ends up being very disappointing. Also, a lot of women, which I experienced with one of my pregnancies, don't immediately feel connected to the baby. And that can be a very disappointing feeling. So I know, for instance, with my son, whenever I had him, I immediately felt so much love for him, despite that I didn't really feel like connected with him whenever I was pregnant with him. To where whenever I had my next kid, I was expecting that same feeling. And whenever I had her, I just like I knew I was responsible for her. I knew she was my kid, but I just didn't immediately feel all of that love like I did prior. And there's a lot of like guilt that I think mothers are put through for the way they feel about their children. So, yeah. And in this moment, this character doesn't really know how to feel. Like, part of her is relieved that it's over. Like, part of her is disappointed that this doesn't end up being a baby. Yeah, so it's kind of crazy. And then, like, her Sion date, the driver ends up running in the hospital room and saying, "Okay, I'm here, I'm ready. I can be this kid's father." And then, like, he slowly realizes that it's too late. Okay, so here's the finished product with the banana bread. It ends up looking like a little bit dark, but it actually is like fully cooked and not burnt. But I have my taste tester here. I ended up looking up a little bit more about the Korean culture that surrounds pregnancy. And there is this concept called, I believe it's Taegyo, Taegyo, that they basically have a series of practices during prenatal development that help foster the development of the fetus. And it's related to the mother's emotional state and physical health. So I just wondered if maybe part of the obstetrician with the heavy makeup, if her beliefs that they should find a father was also shared with the main character, not just because of her warning, but like if that was also like her inside voice. Yeah, so it's really interesting. So let me know what you guys think.